What's up, everyone, and welcome to Cast and Spear. My name is John. In today's episode, we are going to cover everything you need to know about spear guns. So I have something to confess right off the gate. I overspent on my first spear gun by a lot. And I didn't mean to. I just didn't do any research before I went to the local dive shop, and that was my fault. But I want to make sure that if you're just getting into spearfishing, that you don't make the same mistakes that I did. So I put together a huge, massive resource on Cast and Spear's website. Put probably like over 45 hours into this thing, just researching everything there is to know about spear guns. If you want to check that out, that's just at castandspear.com/best-spearguns, and then a / again. Well, let's kind of get started. First and foremost, you can catch a fish with a spear gun that's basically just a piece of wood and a rubber band. I have this great video of this guy in the Philippines who doesn't have any fins, doesn't wear a mask, just has goggles, has a homemade spear gun, and basically has caught dinner for his family for, decades. So it's really, every spear gun that you're going to see in the shops nowadays, they're way more advanced than they probably need to be effective. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't know everything there is to know about all the technology, because, it's going to just make you catch more fish. So the first thing you should know about is the sling style. The slings are traditional. They're basically just elastic bands. They're attached to the tip of the spear gun or the front of the muzzle. Think about like a bow and arrow. You have this piece of wood and you stretch this string and it bends the wood. Well, we have in a spear gun these elastic bands that stretch and they hold and fasten to the end of a spear. And when you pull the trigger, it releases the mechanism holding that spear in place, and the potential energy turns into kinetic energy of these bands and shoots that spear straight through the fish that you want to go. So slings are very common. They're probably the most common in terms of style for a spear gun. The next one would be roller spear guns. It's the same as a sling, except there's two rollers on the front of the spear gun, and that allows you to get a longer stretch in the band for a shorter distance of the barrel. So a lot of people like this because for say 100-centimeter spear gun, you can get the same power out of the roller bands as say like 140-centimeter. So it's nice because you have the nice compact gun, but it's super powerful. Another style that's not as common, I've seen a lot of people who do scuba diving use this style spear gun, and it's called the pneumatic spear gun. And basically you have an air cartridge and you pump it up and you get about 10 to 20 shots, and you load up your spear gun and air shoots the spear out instead of having to worry about the band. Usually they're smaller, they're more compact, and they're great for around the reef if you want to try that. I don't have much experience shooting one of those, but I'm down to give it a try one of these days. So let's dive into the Speargun features. When I bought my first spear gun, I was such a noob. I went into the dive shop, and since I didn't do any research, I had no idea what was features I wanted, what I needed. It's kind of at the mercy of the salesperson. Thankfully, I found somebody who was really nice and kind of walked me through everything. So let's go through some of the features so you can make a sound judgment call for yourself. First one is when it comes to those slings, there are parallel. The bungee isn't in a circle shape. It's just the ends of the bungee are screwed into the tip of the spear gun, and you pull them straight back. So parallel just because there's two of them. So you're going to have to get these custom bungees depending on the gun. Then there's circular. Circular is just like, say, one long bungee that makes kind of like a crescent shape, and then it's attached to the wishbone at the bottom. This is pretty standard, and it's a simple design. You can make your own bungees if that's the case. And then there's double, triple, quadruple. You can have many of these circular elastics to get more power. If you go like blue water, which is like you're going for the big tuna, a lot of guys have 4 or 5 bungees on this big wooden gun. So you can just stack multiple elastics for more power. So the head style of a spear gun, there's usually two different styles. One's open, one's closed. Closed is a plastic hard shell where it holds the spear from wiggling. These usually have a little bit more slack than the open. The open is you're using cable to kind of wrap it around and really fasten the spear shaft onto your spear gun. Both work well. Most people go with the open. They're a little bit more common. The next thing you have is a spear gun wishbone. And these are usually 3 different styles. The first one is wire. So you can just imagine a bent piece of stainless steel wire. These are nice. These are really robust. The next one is a hinge, which is kind of similar to the wire, except it has a more of a free flowing middle member, so it has a little bit more play in there. The thing about wire and hinge is that they can cut you, because imagine trying to pull this powerful elastic band to like hook into your spear. Sometimes if your fingers get caught, you can definitely get hurt a little bit. So a lot of people use what's called dyneema. So it's just like a really strong, powerful thread. So it's like a cord member. And you can't get much more flexibility than a cord that's not metal. So it's very easy to kind of lock into your spear. It's probably one of the most common ones to use. So I'd recommend, Dyneema Wishbone if you can. Let's go into the spear gun barrel styles. There are, the standard round. Round's going to be pretty common, especially in the beginner kinds of guns. Then you have an integrated rail, so a little bit more advanced guns. This integrated rail basically has like a slot or a groove on the top where your spear kind of sits on. It's not enclosed, but it kind of just has an area so that it kind of stays straight. Then you have a trapped rail. This is where your spear kind of gets encased in the barrel. So it's really not going to go anywhere. You're going to get a highly accurate shot. The only problem with this is if you, say, shoot into a rock or you're shoot a big fish and it bends your spear, you're not going to be able to load it again as much as you'd be able to load into an integrated. Then there's a more advanced one called cuttlefish. This is mainly used on carbon fiber guns because you can get these weird shapes. These can be nice because cuts down on some of the drag when you're turning the gun side to side under the water. They're not as common, but they look super cool. The next thing is the spear gun trigger action. A lot of times you're going to have either plastic or metal. Plastic is going to be found in the cheaper guns. Metal is going to last you a lot longer. If you can, I would always recommend, since this is one of the most critical pieces of the spear gun, go with the metal. It'll last longer. The different handles, a lot of times there's, rear and mid. If you have a really big gun, mid's nice because you can kind of hold the trigger with one hand, and you can use where it's located as like a pivot point to be able to move the back of the gun so you can turn it around really quick. Whereas a rear, it's kind of your handles in the back, so the ability to move it from side to side diminishes a little bit. But, it depends on how big your gun is at the time. Then there's safeties. There's a couple different types of safeties. There's like a top style, a side style, and an ambidextrous. Top is good, but it kind of takes two hands to turn on and off, which can be valuable time if you're trying to shoot something. Side is probably the best way to go, and ambidextrous, if you are left or right-handed, doesn't really matter. I don't typically use a safety too much. I think it can take some of the time away, and then if you're always on and always hot, that means you have to really think about what you're doing and be safe at all times. So there's different thoughts when it comes to safety. Let's get into spear gun length. They range from all different sizes. We got super short to super long. Super short is going to be great when it comes where you don't need a lot of power, so it's going to be a lot smaller fish, usually going to be around a reef, to all the way to very long, big, massive wood guns or, big carbon fiber guns. These are going to be for your blue water where you're going to have to take that longer shot. Maybe you're going to go for a marlin or a tuna. Let's talk about barrel materials. There's three common ones that everybody relatively uses, and it's metal. Metal is going to be pretty standard. A majority of the guns are going to be metal. They're good. They're hardy. They're robust. They're light. Almost can't go wrong with the metal gun. You just can't have some of the unique shapes. That's the only downside. The next middle ground is carbon fiber. I can't really justify carbon fiber too much. The metals aren't that much heavier. Carbon fiber, you can have really cool shapes. They look cool, of course. But if you drop it or bring them against the rocks, they're going to be a little bit less robust than, say, wood or metal. A lot of spearos love the wood guns. To be honest, wood is it's sexy. They float in the water. Overall, I think everybody eventually gets a wood gun. I would say between metal and wood are your two best choices. If you want to get started, go metal. If you've been doing this for a while, definitely go wood. Let's go into the difference between float line and reel. So you're going to be shooting a fish, right? And you don't want your spear to just go off into the ether and you're never going to get it back. You need to make sure you can bring that fish back home so you can brain it and put it on the boat. The first option you have is a reel. Reels, just like a fishing reel, it's going to be this little housing that rotates that has a string. You shoot, it reels out when the fish runs, and then you can just use your hand to kind of pull that fish back in and brain it. These are nice. The only problem is if it jams and you shoot a fish, your gun's gone. Like it's just gonna take your gun right out of your hand, depending on how big the fish is. A lot of people recommend using a float line. A float line is a cord that some of them float, some of them don't, but they have these tuna clips on each side, and you hook it to the end of your gun, and then you hook it to a float on the surface. So if you're going through a kelp forest, float lines can be very annoying. You can get like a kelp carrot, which is a small little float, and drag it around, but a lot of times, it gets caught in the kelp. But if you're in blue water, you're definitely going to need a float line hooked to a massive float, hopefully like 3 atmospheres or more. And, once you shoot the fish, it's going to pull that float, tire out, and then you're going to be able to go get that fish. Choose one or the other. In all honesty, if you're just getting started, people recommend the float line. I have both. I tend to go in the kelp forest a lot more, so I'm using a reel at the moment. The spear tips, there's a whole bunch of different ones. There's a single flopper. So imagine it's a piece of metal that after it goes through the fish, it whips out, and then it locks on the backside of the fish so that it won't go out. You have a single flopper, you have double floppers. I've seen 5 floppers, really. Single flopper is probably going to be all you need depending on which fish you're shooting. Some fish have firm meat, so it's not going to break through if they run away. But some do, like a white sea bass. They have very soft meat, so you have to be very, very careful. And this is where a breakaway tip comes in handy. It's a tip that is in 2 members, 2 pieces, and it's attached with a stainless steel cable. So when it pierces through the fish and the fish pulls, that tip comes away from the rest of the spear, and it turns perpendicular to the fish, and then it has the flexibility of that cable to move back and forth. Very cool. Very cool way. They're usually just a little bit more expensive. Then we have the 2 different styles of spears, the actions. You have the American and the Euro. Euro has kind of like a curved trigger action, whereas the American has more of a square. You just have to know what style your gun is. I don't know if there's really that big a preference between the 2. I know a lot of people, what I hear, use a lot more Euro, but as long as you know what style trigger mechanism you have, you just got to make sure when you buy replacement spears that you get the right one. Spear gun brands, there's a ton of them. There's a whole bunch that come off the top of my head. You got the Rob Allens, the Mayers, the Mako, Hammerhead, the Riffy, high-end wood ones, the Daryl Wongs. You got the Hatch. There's a whole bunch. A lot of these guns it's gonna come down to your personal preference, their marketing. But yeah, you got to definitely just play around with a whole bunch of them, see which one feels right for you. So let's get into how do you care for your spear gun. Make sure after you use it every time you rinse it with fresh water and let it dry. Don't let them be in the sun. They'll deteriorate in the UV light, especially the rubber slings. If you have a wood gun, don't keep them in your hot car because you don't want the wood to warp. If your trigger action has sand or rust, find the instruction manual to how to open it up and spray some lubricant in there, maybe some WD-40. If you're not spearfishing, take your bands off, put them in a plastic bag, and put them in the fridge, and this will keep them preserved longer. If you want, you can use rubber lubricant to keep the rubber moist. But since rubber is pretty cheap, it's probably going to be easier to just replace them as needed. Overall, just basically keep your spear gun out of the sun when not in use. They'll last a lot longer. And if you're using a pneumatic gun, realize that it's a lot more rubber components than a sling gun. So it's good to rinse and keep it in a cool, dark place when it's not being used. And when it comes down to size, if you're an absolute beginner, I recommend probably doing around a 75 centimeter. It's small yet powerful, and you'll have some room to grow. And after you feel comfortable, you can get a bigger one. The loading of a sling gun can be annoying in the beginning until you get the proper technique. So 75 centimeters seems to be about right. If you want an all-around gun right out the gate, 100 centimeters, around that, plus or minus 20. A 2-band sling is going to be pretty standard. And if you want to go for the extremely large guns for the blue water game, definitely go wood and get big with like 3 or 4 or 5 bands, and you'll probably be able to knock out any tuna or marlin that you can have. If you want some recommendations on some good guns, I have them on my site. Definitely check them out. If you have any guns that you recommend that I haven't talked about, definitely let me know. Just go to castandspear.com/best-spearguns and let me know in the comments, and I'll definitely reach out to the manufacturers and give them a shout out and try it out. And my final thoughts, I just want to say, there's no best spear gun. It all depends on your skill level, where you're going to be hunting, your personal preference and setups. If you're a beginner, I think the main three things you need to worry about is ease of load and reload and the cost. You're probably going to damage it or lose it or something, so don't get one that's overly expensive until you're really in love with spearfishing. And make sure one's good in the shallows, because if you're just getting started, you're probably not going to go deeper than maybe 30 to 40 feet. And you're just going to be probably in the kelp forest or the reef, so you don't need the biggest gun in the world. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's a little bit longer. There's a lot to cover. I hope you found it valuable. If I missed anything, definitely let me know in the comments. And until next time, keep those lines tight, everyone.